is. Hello, Breckenridge, Colorado.
Wow. There's still a little snow up there. I'm in Denver, so get on up there in the slopes. We're getting some snow this week.
I'm sorry, it's almost 80 here. Very happy. The window's open again. Not open for our 5 folks on this webinar. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is AJ Kuftick. I'm a product manager with Expedient. I want to thank you for joining us today. Today, we also have with us a special guest. His name is Brad Parks from Morpheus Data. Hi, Brad.
Hey there. Nice to be here.
And today we're going to talk about simplifying our cloud management and how to take full advantage of the hybrid environment and really the new world. But as a quick housekeeping note, please enter all questions down here, I believe, into the Q&A panel that helps us keep track of all of them and make sure that they get answered. We'll be answering them after the session. Please feel free to get those questions in. We want to make this interactive and conversational. Had a bunch of really great questions last time. I want to keep that going. All of this is being recorded, so you'll get a link in your email post-event. So if you want to go back and look at it again, show it to somebody else, hopefully you show it to your boss, director, those sorts of things on how you can actually make your cloud journey a little bit easier. But this will also be available on our website, go.expedient.com/webinar replays, youtube.com/expedient, twitter.com/expedient, and linkedin.com/company/expedient. Go ahead and give us a like, subscribe, follow on all those social networks. Brad, do you want to plug any of the Morpheus social networks there too?
Oh, wow. Yeah, sure. So morpheusdata.com, that's the main website. And from there, you can find all the relevant shares. But just like Expedient, we're out there on the interwebs. So LinkedIn and Twitter, certainly 2 big ones that we try and get to. And we have our own webinar series. So yeah, happy to have you join the family.
Absolutely. And, when people join us, sometimes they don't know the whole story. Brad, I think you've heard this story a couple of times now, but we started about 20 years ago doing co-location. Today, we have 14 data centers in 10 cities. And more to come, actually. Virtual co-location started in 2007, right around when AWS started EC2. So we've been doing cloud about as long as Amazon. In 2015, with the rise of virtualization, we were able to make DR easier and faster with push-button DR to get full network failover between data centers. In 2018, we released our enterprise cloud to provide a full HTML5 interface and REST API as a public cloud alternative, so you could get to the cloud operating model you're looking for without any of the refactoring. In 2020, we released our cloud native platform to power next generation applications right next to your existing ones on our enterprise cloud with fully managed Kubernetes, application observability, and persistent container storage. And thanks to our partnership with Morpheus, we were able to release multi-cloud technologies in 2021 to power universal services and help you manage your workloads regardless of cloud. And Brad, that's kind of where I want to start here, because one of the things we see in this space is that a lot of organizations are trying to do multi-cloud. And we've seen that these organizations struggle a lot with this. Kind of where do you see this, starting, and why did we see so many struggles here?
Yeah, when I think about the data and talk to the couple hundred customers we have globally and a lot of the service providers, there's a lot of patterns that emerge. Everyone's special, but there's also a lot of commonality. And I joke that multi-cloud, hybrid cloud is less of a strategy than an inevitability, right? It just happens, whether that's through mergers and acquisitions or different project teams or legacy apps, going through the modernization process. Everybody ends up with some degree of heterogeneity in their on-prem platforms as well as their public cloud use, and that begats this level of complexity. So whether you're, a consumer of 451 Research or IDC or Gartner, across the board, hybrid multi-cloud is a reality, and that's shown here in the level of complexity. I don't think you get one without the other. The more moving parts, the more complex the environment. And these first 2 stats here are really what kind of jump out at me. I was an IT guy way back, before the Stone Age, and I wouldn't want to go back because the amount of technical debt and options and the pressure on the shoulders of IT leaders today is just through the roof. And these first 2, I think, are a good counterpoint to each other. right? So this is, a few hundred senior leaders in enterprise organizations who do this regular voice of the enterprise project with 451, saying the two biggest challenges are existing technical debt with the counterpoint of we're being asked to also do a whole bunch of new things and modernize our apps. Those two together alone are enough to break most organizations.
And I think the interesting part, and for those of you who want to learn more about how technical debt can kill an organization, the new Cloud Math, our webinar from last week, youtube.com/expedient, go check it out. Not now, in a moment. But when we look at this, we kind of see this like the chains are pulling in two different directions, right? I'm being held down by the amount of technical debt that we have in the organization. These are our existing applications. These are the things that we do to support our business day in and day out that don't change next week, next month, but we're being asked to also modernize everything. And so the future is pulling us in a different direction to say, okay, how do we go do this? And I don't necessarily have the capability to do that. And it's so interesting because it makes it really points out this sort of stuck in the middle rock and hard place that a lot of organizations are in. And if you look at it, 71% of IT environments have moderate to high complexity. Yeah, you're not alone. And I think that's the one thing that I really like to point out to people is that everybody feels like, as you mentioned, that everybody's unique. There's a lot of commonalities. And it's like, well, it's just so hard for us. It's hard for everybody. Right. It's not hard it's only easy for the people who are getting started today who don't have the technical debt to worry about, but that's not everybody. In fact, the majority do not have that.
Absolutely. The other kind of interesting piece looking at this is I've kind of tracked this over the last few years. We've seen the same types of items, but the relative stack rank has shifted. For example, I think 4 or 5 years ago, cost control was probably higher on the stack because broad adoption of public cloud was a little newer at the time, and you had a lot more of a lift and shift, and everybody was getting up there, and then you had the sticker shock. So all of a sudden, you had these dedicated platforms and tools just around cost. But if I fast forward, we've seen customers mature quite a bit over the last few years, where they're starting to get the basic governance, the basic cost control, still important. Obviously 25% of folks still say that's their biggest bugaboo, but the need to move forward, bring in more automation, more self-service is starting to kind of overpass it. So it's been interesting to track kind of maturity of cloud use and the relative stack rank of some of these concerns.
Yeah, and I do kind of want to point out from this sort of statistics, because context is always important, that this isn't like one problem per organization. This is all of these problems affecting these organizations, and this is just how many times they were responded to. So it's interesting to see lack of unified security, lack of governance, and cost control start to slide down as, okay, how do I deal with all of this goes up? It's very interesting to kind of see that shift, whereas maybe 5 years ago this might have been a little bit more flip-flopped. What else do you think is driving that? Because I think, we kind of see, all of these seem mostly like technical issues, but I think we also have a problem of skill.
Yeah, we not only are you dealing with all the legacy technical debt, being asked to, take on new challenges and new application modernization projects, the thing that really starts to just hammer on the IT leaders we're talking to is the skills gap. And I've got a daughter in first year of college right now, and if I could have my druthers, I would tell her to go get a VMware cert, learn Terraform, get an AWS cert, also get some Ansible in there, and you can pretty much name your price, because that unicorn is the most sought after set of skills in the industry today, whether it's our own SEs and delivery engineers. I'm sure at Expedient, those are the most valuable resources as well.
And it's something that we see a lot. It's that we want to go to cloud, we want to go do this, but every time we talk about it, or every time we try, we have to hire somebody to come in and help us, or we don't know where we're going, we don't know what to do, because we don't want to make the mistakes where somebody goes, oh, you did that thing, oh, you could have avoided that by doing this other thing. Well, you don't know that until you have the expertise, right? And so this is where we like to talk about the enterprise cloud stack from our side, being able to come in and help accelerate that without ruining the expertise, right? The learning curve is much shorter. But as you look at cloud native engineering and security expertise, this becomes a lot harder. And each cloud individually is their own security stack because they're all different. They're similar, but still very different. And all these statistics are really great, but I kind of want to relay this through a story, a tale.
Let's do it.
And so how did cloud actually get this bad, right? How do you get all of this technical debt and app modernization things? And why does this become so difficult? And it really starts with different teams. And that's largely due to the fact that most organizations, when they are looking at this, nobody goes out and plans to make a mess, right? The reason it's a mess, the reason it gets this bad is because it wasn't planned, right? So you have a bunch of different teams. You have team A saying, I need to solve a business problem. AWS can help me solve that business problem. So I'm going to go to AWS. And you have team B who says, hey, I have a business problem. Azure can solve my business problem. So I'm going to go to Azure. And so now I have different teams with decoupled thinking, right? They're not all on the same page. Heck, they might not even know that either team is doing this. The Azure team might not know that the AWS team is going out there. They may not know that in any way, shape, or form. And so they kind of go off on their own magical journey, distant from each other, likely not even knowing about it. So the first team says, hey, I'm going to migrate 4 apps to AWS. Great. Sounds awesome. I'm going to pick these apps up. We're going to migrate them out there. We're going to go do the thing that we wanted to go do, and I'm going to go solve a business problem. Awesome. Well, there's a couple challenges there, things like identity and security, compliance and operations and connectivity. And how do I make that all work with AWS? It's a big jump, right? But some things get figured out and we move on. The second team says, well, we're going to go build our 2 net new teams or our net new apps on Azure. And when we do this, great, I have Azure Data Lake and I can mine that data and find insights on my customers and solve the business problem I'm being asked to solve. But now I have to solve identity and security and compliance and operations and connectivity for that cloud. Okay, again, not a huge uplift, but enough of one that now I have 2 different clouds, 2 different models run by 2 different teams. Then I have a third team say, hey, you know what? This Google App Engine thing's really sweet. I'm going to go build 22 net new apps on GCP. And I'm getting this really great price and they're really interested in me coming on board. But now I've got yet a third team who has not talked to the AWS team. They've not talked to the Azure team, all going out and doing this. And because of this mess just continues to grow. And I've got 3 clouds and how are they all being managed together? But I've still got 50 apps sitting on premises that are running my mission critical things today. This is the technical debt. This is that 41% from the first statistic, right? I've got 50 apps that are still sitting on premises today that aren't going anywhere. And so I still have to manage those. I still have to patch them. I still have to deal with them and all the resources that go into them. And as time goes on, this cloud success starts to take off. And now I have more databases migrating to AWS. I have machine learning going into GCP. I have data warehouses getting split. I have IoT systems being built on Azure. And now I've got more cloud projects on the horizon. And this is the fun part of all of this. Nobody was wrong. No one made a mistake. No one chose poorly here. All of these teams, all of these folks who worked on all of this got what they wanted. They solved the business case. They solved the problems. They got what they needed done. So from the business standpoint, the business doesn't want to say, oh, well, we're consolidating everything onto Azure. So all the things you built on AWS, you got to move that to Azure. No one wants to do that because the business problem has been solved. Right? This is largely how a lot of IT worked in the, I'd probably say early 90s to early 2000s, finding the solution to the problem. And now you've just got all these like random applications and trying to figure out how to make them all interconnect. This problem's not new. But because of this, each of these individual organizations says there's nothing wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I built the thing and I solved the problem. But we run into challenges, things like security. All of these individual pieces were all built independently. So they weren't built with a security governance structure in mind. They weren't built to keep things, tight and secure. All of these individual teams built it to get something done. And so what is the security attack surface in AWS? Did they configure their S3 buckets right? Who's to say? Did they get these things right? They did the security and compliance things in the beginning, but did they keep it going? That's a different question. There's also a lot of wasting time and energy in here, and this falls into a couple different categories, right? If one team is running the Azure instance, right, and Brad says, I need access to that, who's he calling? Is he calling the IT ops team? They're going to be like, what Azure thing? What? There's an Azure thing? We have one of those? And then there's a team that's actually running it, and if he gets in with them, they'll go, oh yeah, hold on, Brad. Now there's an account. But did Brad put in any formal requests? Is that auditable? Was his access authorized, or did somebody just create an account because they were sick of getting Brad's emails? These are two different things. And so all of this turns into, when it's audit time, people searching their inboxes, trying to find the right procedures. And the people who set out to solve business problems have taken on problems that they didn't want. And finally, there's zero cost or skill efficiencies here. Nobody has settled on what's the right cloud for these workloads. Do we have the right things? Is the team that built the two net new apps on Azure and the team that's building the IoT systems, are they communicating to say this is the right way to do Azure? Maybe, maybe not. The other thing here is that you've got three different pieces all going to AWS. Those might be three different accounts with three different budgets. Hey, what's your organization's amount of money that you spend on AWS? Because if it's not under one giant AWS organization, the only person who knows that is Mary in accounting, and she's going to have to sort out the pencils, pens, and paper out of it. So how do you actually get this cost analysis? This is where this becomes a mess, and then there's a cleanup process and a backfill of proper operations. And Brad, I think this is where we really see organizations get into trouble and where those skill gaps come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you are lucky enough to have one of those unicorns who has that mix of skills, if the next project that comes up, doesn't meet that paradigm, or that, that individual does get a lottery ticket from the next great unicorn startup and leaves your organization, you're left kind of starting over. So it's a constant, treadmill of trying to play catch up. So there are a lot of conversations, to your point, that are to be had with a pretty narrow aperture. I have a business problem. I have a set of application requirements. I have a small team that's getting things done. Keep on trucking, but there are a whole lot of organizational dysfunctions that become apparent when you start to look at this laterally, and it's really the reason, the reason we exist as a platform was really how that came about. We were working with dozens of different companies within a large private equity portfolio, and our own team, right? We were created because our own team needed to modernize apps at scale across 20 different organizations at the same time. So they saw this train wreck, 10, 11 years ago and started working on tools for themselves. And that's really how we came about, was as an output of this kind of dysfunction.
I want you guys to all think about that. A company, a private equity firm, said, we have enough of a struggle that we are going to build an entire software platform to turn it into a product. That is the level of problem solving that this organization had to go through to try to put this all together. And I think when you look at this, and we kind of I talked briefly about how no one really sees this as a problem. It's because everybody's focused on their tree. And we as IT infrastructure folks, I consider myself an IT infrastructure person. I'm not very good at coding. We think about the forest. And when we think about seeing the trees for the forest, we think about what has to happen across all of them, not just the one individual tree. So we think about IT operations, like, how do I monitor all this? How do I manage all this? How do I deploy things consistently? How do I make this auditable? How do I do all of the things that I'm traditionally used to? But it's not so much like, how do I jam this into my traditional mindset? But these are the things that a lot of organizations do because they're good practices. not necessarily because it's the right technology stack or we do this because the technology stack says we have to. It's how do I make sure I know when this thing goes down? How do I know when this thing needs more resources? How do I know when something is deployed? How do I make sure that we have access to it when we need it? And I think that IT operational stack is incredibly important. And then there's the governance and control. Again, how do I make this auditable? Everybody here has gotten the little knock on the door to say, hey, we're getting audited on our main account. How do we make sure that how do we know that these 10 users should have admin access? Oh, well, we have normally it's, if you want access to a server, you fill out the admin access form and then that manager authorizes it. And that's how we monitor access and know that, there was another set of eyes on this. Oh, well, when Steve is the one who's typing in that Brad needs an account, there's no authorization. And so that governance and control goes away, and it leads to a lot of struggle. And that was actually one of the things in there was, how do I maintain compliance on these cloud workloads? Third, we have a developer experience, which is something that on-prem infrastructure generally didn't have for a very long time, because getting new resources was a thing where you had to order stuff and then wait for it to come in. There was this thing called a truck, and a physical box came off of it and went into a rack, and then there were cables that came out of the back, and you had to really need something in order to get a new server. Now you click a button, you get a server, right? Or you click a button, you get a container, or you click a button and get a web server, or you can even get down into, I need a web server, SQL server, and an app server, and I want that all bundled together as one request. That developer experience to grant standardized hardened images is important now. It's expected, it's table stakes. So how do we enable a good developer experience, not just in on-prem, but also in AWS and Azure and GCP and Alibaba and IBM and Expedient Enterprise Cloud? How do we make sure that we have a consistent developer experience across all of those? And finally, cost management and FinOps. We always talk about DevOps, and DevOps is super cool because it involves code, and code means you wear a t-shirt, a hoodie. But when you do these things, when we think about DevOps, we think about how do I modernize my application development? How do I modernize my deployments? FinOps is the opposite. It's because when you go from wearing a button down to a polo, right? How do you make it so that your financial operations are modernized? Because a lot of places buy hardware. That's CapEx, right? I'm purchasing a piece of hardware. I'm going to run it for 5 years. When I'm done, I replace it and I decommission the old thing. And this cycle continues forever. But in a cloud world, you're decommissioning things regularly, monthly, perhaps even daily. And so how do I manage that so that my cost management is maintained, so I know exactly what I'm spending so that I don't have big spending spikes? But also, how do I make sure that when it's time to spin things down, that our budgeting knows that we've spun things down? And all of this is forest level. It's across all of the trees. It is not necessarily something that each individual tree should be worrying about. It's what the forest actually needs. And Brad, I just want to give Brad full credit. This was trees versus forest was his idea, not mine. But I think it works really well to help explain this.
No, you captured it crystal clear. I think the only you can prevent forest fires, analogy. I was joking with AJ yesterday. I wear my honorary National Forest Service hat. When I heard you walk through this, it reminded me of the blog I bring up about every year around Thanksgiving, and it's the turducken of operations, because now you get, dev, sec, fin, cloud ops, right? They all, you've got different groups trying, I think this is an acknowledged problem where you've got IT and dev trying to work a little closer together and shift left. You've got the finance team, where do you embed security? And again, these are organizational problems that if you're in an individual team and in an individual cloud, don't seem like problems, right? But at a certain level of the organization, it's one of the reasons when we end up talking to a VP of I&O who does see the forest, it's untenable for them, and it's certainly untenable at scale. One of the other questions that actually came up on the chat, just kind of bring it in, someone asked about, is this a lot like shadow IT? And I do think back to the kind of early days of multi-hybrid cloud, shadow IT meant, command and control, right? How do we keep these darn guys in their hoodies from going off the reservation and just moving around IT, right? That is what the kind of idea around cloud management was in 2011, where a lot of those first generation cloud management platforms came about. If I fast forward, AJ hit on something that is probably worth prying into, is that developer experience. You now have, nearly a decade of development teams, project teams who are used to going to the public cloud, hitting a button and getting their app stack back in 5 minutes. Why? Because AWS and Azure have made the 200 ticket requests fully transparent and all API driven. You turn that attention on-prem, you now have big organizations who are trying to modernize those on-prem apps that still have data gravity, still have security concerns, where you need to still maintain that control, but the expectation has changed. Today, what is an on-prem private cloud does not equal slightly better VMware. It means, a team that wants to complete a build, hit an API, get their environment deployed, and get it all back, without ever talking to anybody from IT. So that conversation has also impacted the forest at scale.
So it's funny you mentioned that, because you're talking a lot about something called self-service.
Oh.
So Brad,
it's like we thought through this.
Don't pull back the curtain. So when we talk about things like self-service, kind of talk me through where this persona-based approach comes in.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about Morpheus. It might be a new platform for a lot of the team out there and on the webinar. So Morpheus Data, we are a unified orchestration platform, also called CMP, Cloud Management Platform. But at our heart, we were designed to enable self-service. So back to that origin story AJ and I hit on a little bit. We had a team of developers who were trying to modernize the applications at dozens of companies owned by our parent portfolio private equity company. They needed to be able to deploy apps very quickly without waiting on the internal IT department at one of these companies that we were helping to transform. So self-service for them meant things like calling a line of code or hitting a button and getting their database deployed. But it can also be applied to, I want to provision a Kubernetes cluster on demand, or I need to go run my Terraform code or my Ansible playbooks without, again, having to go tap the mental energy of the couple of guys who have that expertise. How do we make that a catalog-driven provisioning experience? Then the last kind of way self-service comes to life is around things like ServiceNow, right? We have people who want to be able to provision, but also update CI records and CMDBs. So when we think about the personas that have to wrap around that self-service experience, the first one is IT, right? That's who our bread and butter conversations are with. And to tell a story, a lot like AJ did, American Express, one of our big customers, the VP of I&O there talks about how he started engaging with Morpheus, right? His team's goal was to create that on-prem private cloud experience, also wrap some tree-level governance around public cloud, simplify the operational nature of Kubernetes, and provide a simple way to automate all that day two work. When he landed on Morpheus, he said, I got to navigate my own organization. My first call is going to be to the CISO, because when we have poker night and we talk about those darn developers, right? We need to make sure that we are keeping track of how are we securing the data? How are we connecting into our identity providers and putting policy around things, maintaining compliance? There are a lot of security tools that are great cleaning up the mess after it's a mess. How do you work backwards and embed security at the point of provisioning, right? Get all your agents installed, golden image templates. So once he had the security guy on board, their next call was to the development team, right? A lot of traditional friction between developers and the operations teams. Why? Because guys who like GUIs and SLAs and infrastructure may not speak YAML and code generation and all the things that developers want. Well, our VP of I&O in this story told his developers, hey, if you want to just own this and go in a closet and build your own, I'm okay. But before we do that, here's a couple things you're going to need to think about. You are going to need to take on the patching and the maintenance and updating the CMDB, and you're going to go talk to the ServiceNow team before you ever do anything cool and innovative and get to really embrace innovation. The development team said, hey, if you can give me a self-service portal and then get out of the way, you got my vote. Last call to the guys with the checkbooks, right? This was the finance team who needed to understand cloud cost, try and make sure teams were staying within budget, we're being able to optimize things along the way. So this really is the full stack that Morpheus brings to the conversation. We're able to enable each of these different groups to get their individual KPIs met without getting in each other's way. So these are tree level or forest level conversations that need to happen consistently across clouds. And in talking with AJ a couple of weeks ago, I think one of the things that's been pretty powerful as we start to work with our service providers like Expedient is we've created a normalized view of the world so that whether it's your costing database, your provisioning experience, or your governance model, you don't have to go through gymnastics to do that across your VMware, your Nutanix, your AWS, your Azure, your enterprise cloud.
And I think the interesting part is not just because I think a lot of times when people see a CMP, they get very nervous. They're going to have to do a whole lot of work, that they're going to have to build it all from scratch. And that's simply not the case with Expedient. We've actually, because we've partnered with Morpheus, we effectively deliver Morpheus as a service. And this is what backs our Expedient cost control platform. So we can do full cost management and analysis of all of these public clouds to see where are you spending all your money and how much are you going to spend this month, and do that from a report standpoint where those can be emailed, or you can analyze them in real time with really pretty pie charts. The other thing we do is continuously optimize. So I can say at time of deployment, this 2 CPU, 8 gig of RAM, 100 gig of storage box, this is going to cost me this much on the Expedient Enterprise Cloud versus AWS versus Azure versus GCP. So you can actually get the ability to make decisions based on the financial model, not just the technology stack. So you get that up front. That's really, really hard to do, and Morpheus makes it incredibly easy. But then there's also the continuous optimization on the back end to say, hey, you deployed this box to 8 gigs. You're only using 2 gigs. Why don't you drop this down to 4 gigs of RAM and save $18 to $20 a month, which can add up to many, many dollars over the course of 3 years, just by right-sizing your environment down and continuously monitoring to say, hey, oh, you were really only using that 2 gigs because it was just when you were getting started. Now you're using 5 to 6 gigs. You should probably up the amount of RAM that you have in this box. Again, not just downsizing, but right-sizing. And finally, as Brad mentioned, standardizing those processes and bringing everything together so I can send out standardized hardened image that the infrastructure and operations team say, these are the good ones. We know these are good. So when you do a deployment, please use these so that we know that when it comes time for security audits and vulnerability scanning, that we're not going to find out that there's this weird Arch OS box that's hanging around out there that we didn't know existed. And now we have to go figure all that out. And with Terraform and Ansible, we can do configuration management and enable that developer experience that you're looking for. And what we want to do is help accelerate this cloud journey. So this isn't just with our enterprise cloud. This is with all of the hyperscale clouds and all of their platforms as a service. And because we've come together, we can help accelerate this even faster. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website, expedient.com/services/assessments, to get a free cloud assessment to find the right cloud for your workload. And you can go to expedient.com/services/multi-cloud to learn more about our multi-cloud toolset. And if you want to learn more about Morpheus themselves, that's morpheusdata.com. And you can see the true power of the platform and how we as Expedient can help bring it to you as a service. And Brad, is there anything that you want to add before we get out of here?
I just want to let everyone know we're super excited about our partnership with Expedient, right? We're a platform vendor. We're software. We're not a services organization. We're not going to transform, your lives. That's what the experts at Expedient really have brought to the table, right? Is bridging that skills gap, bringing a more modern approach to infrastructure management, and providing that connectivity into all the clouds. So I couldn't be more excited about being on here with you today, AJ, and think if anyone heard anything that they thought was interesting on the Morpheus side, the team at Expedient really does spend day in, day out with our engineers, helping to influence where we take this platform. They're the ones who can bring the brain power to this to help you bring it to life.
Can confirm. Brad will talk. So please, thank you for joining us today. We will be back in 2 weeks on April 27th, where we will be talking to one of our customers, TopRx, around how our operations control platform, it's partially powered by Morpheus as well, was able to help them go faster and see deeper into their performance. We will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.